sunshine once again and light winds for parts of England and Wales, particularly the further south you are. Into the evening on Thursday, the showers ease away, clear skies for a time, but a little feature will bring some outbreaks of rain into western Scotland and Northern Ireland by the end of the night. And temperatures will stay up in the teens in many places, perhaps dipping into the single figures in some very sheltered spots. So again, not oppressively warm overnight, but not particularly chilly either. Clear start to the day on Friday in the south, plenty of sunshine here. Cloudier further north with outbreaks of rain moving through Scotland and Northern Ireland during the morning. They clear and then sunshine widely on Saturday and Sunday and turning hotter.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, where we get stuck into the day's big issues that need looking at in depth. Nothing is off the table and no one will be cancelled for saying what they think. Keeping me company today is political commentator Emma Webb, and here's what we've got coming up on the show. The race for number 10 is starting to resemble a Margaret Thatcher impersonation competition. But who can win over Tory MPs with their best take on the Iron Lady? The second critical vote is due any minute. We keep pace with the intrigue. Sickening findings from the inquiry into 30 years of rape and abuse of young girls in Telford by Asian grooming gangs. Lessons must be learned. But there's a deafening silence from those vying to lead the country. We talk to a victim. And it's still hot. And getting hotter. Roads are melting, birds are falling from the sky. For a country so obsessed with weather, why can't we deal with a heatwave? That's what we're talking about, but what's got you hot under the collar? Slide your clammy hands onto your keyboards and let us know. GBViews at gbnews.uk or GB News on Twitter. First though, it's time for the GB News headlines. A very good afternoon to you. It's just coming up to 2 minutes past 2. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. Now, the first round of voting is underway for Conservative MPs to choose who they support in the leadership contest. 8 candidates are still in the running. They've been soliciting support today. The Trade Secretary, Penny Mordaunt, launched her campaign this morning, saying she'd return to traditional Conservative values and fix what she called a broken Whitehall machine. Tom Tugendhat has pledged to increase defence spending. The candidates have to hit a threshold of 30 votes today to stay in the race. The results will be announced at 5 p.m. In a recently published YouGov poll, it found Penny Mordaunt was the favourite to win amongst Conservative voters. The former Brexit Secretary, David Davis, who's supporting her, said her plan for the economy is strong.
This is a thoughtful approach which will actually work. And that's the key point. Will it work? If we are running an economic policy that's working at the next general election, we'll win. If we're running one which is made up of populist nonsense, we'll lose.
Boris Johnson has defended his record in office, saying he'll leave Downing Street with his head held high. In the first Prime Minister's question since his resignation, Mr Johnson was accused of leaving behind a broken economy. The Prime Minister said he believed his team in government had done a remarkable job in helping the country through difficult times.
Last week, he resigned, accusing the Prime Minister of not conducting government properly, competently or seriously. He suggested the Prime Minister is not prepared to work hard or take difficult decisions, and implied that the Prime Minister cannot tell the public the truth. Yesterday, he claimed his big plan is to rebuild the economy. Now, even the Prime Minister must be impressed by that Johnsonian brass-neckery. Can the Prime Minister think of any jobs his former Chancellor may have had that means he bears some responsibility for an economy that he now claims is broken?
At the end of 3 years, Mr. Speaker, we got Brexit done, which he voted against 48 times. We delivered the first vaccine in the world and rolled it out faster than any other European country, which would never be possible if we listened to him, Mr. Speaker. And we played a decisive role in helping to protect the people of Ukraine from the brutal invasion of Vladimir Putin and helped to save Ukraine, Mr. Speaker.
The UK economy grew by 0.5% in May, following a 0.2% drop in April. Analysts had expected the figure to remain flat. The ONS says the growth came after a bounce back across all services, manufacturing and construction, with an increase in demand, particularly for health services and holidays. The president of Sri Lanka has temporarily authorised the country's prime minister to carry out presidential duties. It's amid ongoing protests in the country caused by anger over inflation and widespread fuel and medicine shortages. The Premier's fled to the Maldives hours before he was due to resign. Demonstrators have stormed the Prime Minister's office and continue to call for his resignation. Twitter is suing Elon Musk for breaking a £37 billion deal to buy the social media platform. Twitter's asking a US court to order the Tesla owner to complete the merger at the agreed share price. Last week, Musk said he was terminating the deal because Twitter failed to provide information regarding how many fake accounts were on the platform. New CCTV footage has been released showing the events that took place in an elementary school in Texas in May. The video shows the police stopping to use hand sanitizer as 18-year-old gunman Salvador Ramos entered the school in Uvalde carrying a rifle. 19 children and 2 teachers were killed in the latest in a string of mass shootings across the US. Figures obtained by GBNews show more than 14,000 migrants crossed the channel this year in small boats. 4 men have been arrested in a national crime agency operation targeting migrant smuggling to the UK in lorries. A man was arrested in Dagenham on suspicion of facilitation offences, as well as 3 further men in Ilford, Streatham and Leytonstone. The arrests are linked to 2 separate events in 2019, where a total of 32 migrants were found in the back of HGVs in the Netherlands and France. An amber warning for extreme heat has been issued for this Sunday and next Monday. The Met Office are warning of potentially exceptionally high temperatures that could impact infrastructure and travel. They say adverse health effects leading to potential serious illness or danger to life, and these are not limited to those most vulnerable to extreme heat. This is GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to We Need to Talk About. And the winner of the 2022 Conservative Leadership Contest and your next Prime Minister is dead. That's right, a UK, if not a world first. Yes, the Tories are likely to be able to boast either the first non-white leader of the country or the 3rd female Prime Minister. But even more astonishingly, if every campaign is to be believed, that person will be the worldly living vessel for the ghost of Margaret Thatcher. Whether it's Maggienomics Sunak or tank-straddling Truss, evoking the spirit of Mrs T is this year's campaign must. Strange for a party that has just hounded out of office their most popular leader, even sparking that same "What have they done?" Express headline from 1990, but this time in the Daily Mail. Yet, what they all seem to be missing as they summon the soul of the departed is that if there's one thing Maggie was not, it was a fake. Well, let's get the latest with our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who's live in Westminster. And first up, Darren, Boris Johnson has held his penultimate PMQs as Prime Minister, or was it? Was it his last?
Yeah, he kept alluding to the fact that it might well be his last, though his spokesperson afterwards insisted he would be there unless something unforeseen happened with the Conservative leadership race, which seems pretty unlikely, though there are continued rumours that given that he repeatedly suggested this may be the end, that he could go on a foreign trip, for example, next week, maybe a trip to Ukraine to try and avoid the last PMQs, but there is scheduled to be one next week. He did, though, use the opportunity time and again to talk about his records around delivering Brexit, around COVID and the vaccine. And you got that sense, didn't he, that he was trying in many ways to assert that record in Parliament. But and he obviously said he was going to leave office with his head held high, though insisting obviously he wasn't leaving of his own accord. I think what was also really interesting, though, Alex, is that in many ways this PMQs was not about Boris Johnson at all. Keir Starmer's questions, lots of questions from MPs, were aimed actually at the 8 other candidates who are trying to seek the leadership of the Conservative Party. And it is a reminder in these times, isn't it, that actually very quickly, this is how brutal politics is, that focus and power shifts away from those when they decide to step aside and very much focuses on who may well be next.
Well, yes, and there may well be some people stepping aside this evening. What is going to be going on this evening in the leadership race?
Yeah, so fascinating, isn't it? Voting is underway now in the first round of the Conservative leadership race. MPs began voting, about half an hour or so ago at 1:30. They've got 2 hours to vote in the first round. We're expecting the result at around 5 p.m. And then what's going to happen is you have to reach this threshold of 30 MPs to get into the second round. And if everyone reaches the threshold of 30 MPs, which seems pretty unlikely, but if they do, it will be the person with the lowest number of votes who will automatically get kicked out. So we will lose at least one candidate today. We may well lose more. Could Nadhim Zahawi, could Jeremy Hunt, could Suella Braverman get to that total of 30? I think some of them guaranteed to do so, such as Rishi Sunak, such as Penny Mordaunt, probably Liz Truss as well. And as I say, we'll get that result around 5, and then we're expecting another ballot as they whittle those numbers down tomorrow. We also got a little more detail as well in terms of the hangover later on this summer, at the start of the autumn. We know that new Conservative leader, which will ultimately be decided, of course, not by MPs but by Conservative members, will be announced on the 5th of September. We're then, according to Number 10, expecting the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, to step down on the 6th of September. So he will go to the Queen the day after that. And that's when formally he will hand over the reins of power to whoever that new Conservative leader is. And frankly, at the moment, we heard Penny Mordaunt launch her kind of campaign formally this morning. It is entirely unpredictable about who's going to end up in those final two. Though looking at a YouGov poll that's just been issued in the last hour or so, it seems that she, and not Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss, that she, Penny Mordaunt, is out in the lead, at least in terms of popular support amongst Conservative members, and also that she would beat she would beat every other possible candidate who may end up in the final two. Unsurprisingly, her supporters will continue to press that with MPs, insisting that she's popular not just with Conservative members, but she is the candidate, they would argue, who Labour are most afraid of.
Darren, thank you ever so much. Darren McCaffrey, there, our political editor. Well, joining me in the studio throughout the show is political commentator Emma Webb. Now, a new Cold War, national strikes, economy in dire need of rescue. No wonder they all want to exhume Thatcher. But I spoke to her former assistant about Sunak's claims that if she were around today, she'd be doing the same thing that he's proposing when it comes to the economy. And he basically said, boulder dash. Who do you think Maggie would be supporting?
Kemi Badenoch, I think, is the person who most actually sort of really fulfills the role that Thatcher played, not only because Thatcher was a dark horse, nobody necessarily expected her to win, but also because of her sort of, I suppose you would say, emphasis on a smaller state, emphasis on lower taxes, and also, I think, a much more maverick approach to a lot of the issues that we're facing. I think some of those who are at the front runners at the moment, Rishi Sunak, Penny Mordaunt, Liz Truss, they're suiting and booting themselves in the mould of Margaret Thatcher gives off the appearance that they are more living off the family silver than actually carrying forward Thatcher's legacy in any way. Whereas I think that actually the really differentiated candidate in this race is Kemi Badenoch.
But we could be set to lose her, potentially, if she doesn't get enough backing in votes that are taking place right now. People talk, don't they, of a schism in the Conservative parties, the left-wing candidates, the right-wing candidates. Do you think that that really matters?
I think it does to a degree, but I think also in this current contest, there is some confusion about really what the candidates stand for. I'm quite baffled, actually, over the popularity of Penny Mordaunt, because on a lot of the key issues, particularly on issues to do with the culture war, whether it's to do with gender, certain comments that she's made in the past about racism and sexism within British comedy and so on, actually, in many ways, she doesn't fit with what you would expect the Conservative members would want from a candidate on those issues, and also doesn't represent the views that you would expect in those marginal red wall seats that the Conservatives really need to hold on to in order to keep their majority. So in some senses, I think the way that Penny Mordaunt, for example, presents herself as being this sort of military woman and very much in the mould of Thatcher, I think perhaps people are not seeing through that to Charles Moore wrote a very good article about this recently, to the heart of what their ideas actually are. I think that Rishi's economics are very, very far removed from Thatcher's. I think that Penny Mordaunt is not everything that necessarily she appears. And with Liz Truss, yes, she very much presents herself in the mould of Thatcher, but I don't think that she is really ready to step into those shoes.
It was only yesterday she was a Liberal Democrat at university. Emma, thank you ever so much. Well, I'm joined now by Labour MP Steve McCabe and writer, broadcaster and former Conservative MP Edwina Currie. Edwina, now many of the candidates, as we've been discussing, have been invoking Margaret Thatcher as their political inspiration and guide. You worked with her, so do any of them actually match up?
Oh, my goodness. I think Margaret herself would find all this a bit bemusing. And she would certainly be taking the line that the first thing you have to do is conquer inflation. If you don't conquer inflation, you're really in trouble. And in that sense, I think Rishi Sunak, who has used very similar words, is probably closest at the moment. Although if you look at what he actually did in the 3 years that he's Chancellor, he's tended to put taxes up. And we've had a huge growth in the importance and the employment of the state. Now, he would say, well, that's because we had COVID, and that is all absolutely correct. But looking at the 8 of them, let me just say this, if I may, Alex. There's 8 there. We had no quotas. We had no box ticking. We managed to produce 4 men, 4 women, from very diverse backgrounds, representing most of the religions in the United Kingdom. How about that? You know, it's absolutely amazing. And we've done it with absolutely no virtue signalling of any kind. What a great country we're in, hey?
Edwina, you're ruining the second half of my programme because that's exactly what I say and what we're going to discuss. Staying with us, Steve McCabe now, who do you think that seeking an heir to Margaret Thatcher is desirable?
Well, you know, I mean, I listened to Edwina there and she's obviously been through it all before. But I think there's only a few of us left who actually remember Margaret Thatcher. I'm not sure it's the best way to look to the future.
Why do you think it is that the Conservative Party need to invoke someone like Margaret Thatcher all the time? Do you think they're losing their identity?
To some extent, that is actually true. I think this is an exceedingly confused leadership, bid. I mean, 1 minute they are talking big state, then small state, tax cuts, then getting inflation under control. I think we're about to see some kind of battle for the soul of the Conservative Party, but I'm not sure if any of the candidates actually know what they're fighting for.
And going back to you, Edwina, what is it, if you were here advising candidates, what is it they should be fighting for, beyond the fact that we are in economic freefall, that we have seen some growth today? But other than that, what do you think that, 21st century Conservative Party should hold as their principal ideology?
I would like to see us being much less woke and talking an awful lot more common sense. I think GBNews has contributed in a very positive way to much of that discussion in recent months. And in that respect, I think Kemi Badenoch is really quite something. I've been looking her up. I'd hardly heard of her before. But there she is. She's a computer scientist. Margaret Thatcher was a scientist. She is a mother of 3 children, married, and is, she's done all sorts of things. She comes from a very ordinary background and was flipping burgers when she was a student. But what she says, what Kemi says, I like very much indeed, that, let's not kind of pander to the headlines. Let's be thinking. This country is not in recession. Everybody's talking the country down, and it shouldn't be. This country is not in recession. We've seen some growth. We've seen growth in the early part of the year. There is a bounce back that's happening not through government effort, but through the sheer hard work of ordinary people running businesses up and down the country. And that, I think, is very much a way forward.
Steve, I'm going to come back to you, and we're going to stick on the subject of Kemi Badenoch, because surely out of those candidates, she would be someone who would make the Labour Party's life quite difficult when it comes to throwing slurs from the other side of the green benches about all of the isms. She stands up for small c Conservative values, and it's pretty hard to get the mud to stick on her.
Well, I think I'm not a great gambler, but I think the chances of the Tory party membership selecting her as leader are probably about 1,000,000 to 1, so I'm not really sure it makes much difference what she purports to stand for.
Steve McCabe, Labour MP for Birmingham Selly Oak, and of course Edwina Curry, thank you ever so much for joining me today in this discussion. I want to know your views. Do you actually want to see the heir to Thatcher in number 10? Email me gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us @gbnews. You're with GB News on TV and radio. Coming up, we'll speak to a victim of grooming in Telford following the inquiry that found over 1,000 girls have been abused by Asian gangs in the town. Time for a short break now. Going to check on the weather forecast.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Dry for many of us today, although not for everyone. There will be some warm sunshine across much of the country. There'll also be some showers for parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. Low pressure is way to the north of the UK, but it's still close enough to produce a few showers for Scotland and Northern Ireland. For England and Wales, a ridge of high pressure continues to dominate and it's a fine day. But there has been some early cloud for southern parts of England and South Wales, and that's slowly peeling away during the afternoon. Sunnier skies follow, but there'll also be some sunny spells for Scotland and Northern Ireland, albeit with 1 or 2 showers. The most frequent of these will be in the far north, where it will be cool with a keen breeze. I think high teens, low 20s for northern parts of the UK, mid to high 20s further south, and then a warm night to come for many of us, with the cloud disappearing in the south, but with plenty of clear spells for many. There'll be a few more showers coming into northern and western Scotland and parts of Northern Ireland overnight. 12 Celsius in Glasgow and Belfast, 15 for London, so a relatively mild, or in some places warm night to come. And then another fine start to the day tomorrow with plenty of sunshine for England and Wales. I think 1 or 2 showers could just about move into parts of England, especially over the Pennines, and there'll be more widespread for Scotland and Northern Ireland as well. In between, still some sunshine, high teens, I think, widely in the northern half of the UK. Sunshine remains in the south with 25 to 28 Celsius. Into Thursday evening, the showers in the north eventually die away, and then widely clearing skies, and really the trend into the weekend is for high pressure to develop widely across the UK. That will lead to widespread sunshine and dry weather, and it will turn increasingly hot, temperatures approaching the mid-30s later.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
3 decades and 1,000 young lives destroyed at the altar of cowardice and political correctness. The inquiry into the rape, exploitation and sexual abuse of young white girls in Telford at the hands of Asian grooming gangs makes shocking reading. Yet have we really broken the barriers of taboo that will stop an atrocity like this ever happening again? Well, judging by the deafening silence of the politicians fighting it out to lead the country, no. As the inquiry laid bare mid-campaign 47 unforgivable failings by police and local authorities, it sounds the alarm that the ruling elite are still not prepared to risk their own reputations to spare the lives, humiliation and chronic abuse of those without a voice. If not now, when? Every journalist with the privilege of speaking truth to power should be challenging candidates on this. And yet, the conspiracy of silence once again wraps like a comfort blanket around those with precious careers to protect. Well, joining us now is columnist and writer Samantha Smith, who has herself been a victim of child sexual abuse and grooming in Telford. Samantha, do you find it shocking that the inquiries come out, the headlines have been in the newspapers, and yet people who are fighting to run this country are not talking about it?
I think that Telford is just the latest in a string of exposés on child sexual exploitation and child sex crimes across the country. And the silence comes from the very top. It isn't just politicians that have turned a blind eye, it's police officers, it's local councils, it's local authorities, it's social workers, it's GPs, it's sexual health clinics. Every single responsible adult that was charged with protecting young girls in areas like my own turned a blind eye, blamed the victims and suggested that it was their own promiscuity or, God forbid, labelling them child prostitute, which, by the way, there isn't such a thing as a child prostitute. There is a child rape victim. Child prostitution isn't a thing. These were adult men raping, exploiting, abusing, and in some cases even murdering young, innocent girls in Telford, over 1,000 of them.
We've seen this pattern emerge in other parts of the country, and it seems to continue to go on and on. Let's try and get some things sort of straight here and lift the lid on what really happens in those situations. As you said, there are people out there who might be minded to victim blame. How do young girls end up caught in a web like this where they're victims of grooming gangs?
Well, grooming is the act of tricking someone into doing something against their will. There's nothing consensual about grooming. And in many cases, such as my own, it doesn't start out with abuse. You know, you're not dragged off the street kicking and screaming and raped straight away. It starts with kindness, gifts. Some people, for some children, it was alcohol, takeaways, money, trips to places, picking them and their friends up from school. In many cases, the victims believed that they were dating, they were in relationships with these men, and then the abuse starts. Then they begin being passed around like a party favor and raped above takeaways in graveyards, taken advantage of, plucked off the streets, and made to feel as though they had somehow gotten themselves into the situation, or that they were to blame because those that they approached for help sought to denigrate their stories and question whether they were real victims, whether they were worthy of support. Because frankly, the only reason why these victims weren't given the time of day by police, local authorities, social services, etc., was because they didn't deem the victims worthy of support. These are mainly white working class girls being abused by predominantly Pakistani men, and there's a culture of silence and, as the report rightly indicated, nervousness, quote unquote, around race in going after the perpetrators, and therefore victims were allowed to suffer in silence for decades.
What do you think needs to happen to stop history repeating itself?
I think the first thing that needs to happen is a complete acknowledgement of responsibility from those at the top. As recently as 2018, 2019, 2020, police officers, so the former chief superintendent of West Mercia Police, Tom Harding, said that he didn't believe there was a discernible problem with CSE in Telford, and that the force had, quote unquote, the resources to deal with it. The Telford 10, as we call them locally, a group of merry men, of councillors, of police officers, the Police and Crime Commission, the leader of the council, Councillor Sean Davis, at the time Cabinet Member for Children and Young People, Councillor Paul Watling, they signed a letter saying that there was no need for an inquiry into CSE in Telford, that a national inquiry would cover it, and that there was no need to look at the cases of girls in my area, because frankly they didn't think that it would be useful, and it would serve to drag up more questions and embarrass them, when all they cared about was protecting their own reputation rather than actually supporting and bringing justice for the girls that had suffered decades worth of abuse. So until an acknowledgement of responsibility happens, change isn't going to occur in Telford.
Or anywhere. Samantha, thank you so much for bravely talking about this once again. It's always vital to hear the voice of people like you. Well, West Mercia Police have apologised to survivors for letting them down. Assistant Chief Constable Richard Cooper said, while there were no findings of corruption, our actions fell far short of the help and protection you should have had from us. It was unacceptable. We let you down. It's important we now take time to reflect critically and carefully on the content of the report and the recommendations that have been made. Meanwhile, Telford and Wrekin Council apologised wholeheartedly to the survivors for the pain they have gone through, adding, child sexual exploitation is a vile crime that disgusts us and all right-thinking people. The independent inquiry acknowledges we have made significant improvements in recent years. You're with GB News on TV and DAB radio. Coming up, the danger to life alert is extended as the heatwave continues to make Britain sweat. Now, though, it's time for a check on the news headlines.
It's 2:32. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. The first round of voting is underway for Conservative MPs to choose who they support in the leadership contest. 8 candidates are still in the running. They've been soliciting support today. Trade Secretary Penny Mordaunt launched her campaign saying she'd return to traditional Conservative values. Tom Tugendhat's pledged to increase defence spending. The candidates have to hit a threshold of 30 votes today to stay in the race, with results being announced at 5 p.m. Boris Johnson has defended his record in office, saying he'll leave Downing Street with his head held high. In the first Prime Minister's question since his resignation, Mr Johnson was accused of leaving behind a broken economy. The Prime Minister said he believed his team in government had done a remarkable job in helping the country through difficult times. The UK economy grew by 0.5% in May, following a 0.2% drop in April. Analysts had expected the figure to remain flat. The ONS says the growth came after a bounce back across all services, manufacturing and construction, with a particular increase in demand for health services and holidays. The President of Sri Lanka has temporarily authorised the country's Prime Minister to carry out presidential duties. It's amid ongoing protests in the country caused by anger over inflation and widespread fuel and medicine shortages. The Premier has fled to the Maldives hours before he was due to resign. Demonstrators have stormed the Prime Minister's office and continue to demand his resignation. Twitter is suing Elon Musk for breaking a £37 billion deal to buy the social media platform. Twitter's asking a US court to order the Tesla owner to complete the merger at the agreed share price. Last week, Musk said he was terminating the deal because Twitter failed to provide information regarding how many fake accounts were on the platform. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Shortly, we'll be back to Alex for We Need to Talk About.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to We Need to Talk About. Now, before the break, we were discussing the child sex abuse scandal in Telford, where more than 1,000 children were abused over 30 years. My guest political commentator, Emma Webb, wanted to have her say on this. Emma, I know this is something that you've looked at in depth.
It is. I've had conversations publicly and privately with people who have worked on this or who have been victims themselves. And the name of this show is We Need to Talk About It. We need to talk about this. This is something that we know has been going on for decades, and we are still not having a proper public conversation about it. And that reflects exactly the thing that caused the problem in the first place, which is partly the the prioritising of people's careers and their reputation, and people thinking that it's more important that they're not viewed as racist than to save these girls from these horrible crimes that are taking place. And this is happening at a national level because people are frightened to talk about this because they fear being viewed as right-wing because it's perceived as being a right-wing issue. This is not a right-wing issue. This is about the safety of children and it's about the safety of girls. And it's something that should be something that our leadership candidates are discussing at the moment. It's something that we need to be having a national conversation about. But the problem is people are frightened of being perceived as racist.
Yeah, Emma, I couldn't agree more. Thank you. Well, when the left fights the right, it's guaranteed you can play bigotry bingo. Slurs of racism, homophobia, transphobia and misogyny are used like cluster bombs to slander the characters of those prepared to champion small c conservative values. And yet, by sheer force of meritocracy, the current slate of 8 candidates to be the next Prime Minister consists of a Kenyan-born Indian, an Iraqi Kurd, a half-French student of Islamic studies from Austrian Jewish heritage, and then the other half are women, one of whom is African and another Indian whose parents emigrated to Britain from Kenya and Mauritius. Poor Starmer, or should I say Sir Keir, has been desperately trying to up his credentials by repeating that he's the son of a toolmaker, neglecting to mention his family owned the firm that helped pay for his private education. But the point is, none of this should matter. So why does it keep getting rolled out like a cheap diversity scorecard? Well, joining me now on the show is Rakib Ehsan, who's a columnist at The Critic. Rakib, I mean, I'm not saying it's a bad thing to boast of the fact that the 8 current candidates have half of them are women and at least 4 candidates from immigrant backgrounds. But, I mean, if we're living in a colourblind society, should we not be keeping a tally?
Well, I think that there's elements of the left and right who are looking to weaponise the demographically diverse nature of the Tory leadership contest. But the reality of the matter is, Alex, ultimately what it boils down to is substance and policy. That's what I'm primarily interested in. We are in the middle of a cost of living crisis, which is affecting families up and down the country. Even stable family units with prudent working parents struggling to make ends meet. In the sphere of education, we have many children, the lost children of the pandemic, suffering from persistent absence. We have school children who have also, their motor skills development has been stunted, record number of children receiving language therapy. I think that, for example, the government's levelling up agenda has really stalled. There's rural poverty and fishing communities are really missing from those left behind narratives as well. Communities which very recently voted quite heavily for the Conservative Party. So I think what I'm really getting at here is that there's a great deal of focus on the racial identity and ethnic heritage of the Tory leadership candidates. I want to hear more about what's their plan to create a more secure immigration regime, a more security-oriented asylum system. What are they going to do to help left behind communities which are, economically struggling, socially disconnected and culturally marginalised? What are they going to do to help lift educational standards in our local communities? So those are the kind of things that I'm really interested in, to be honest.
I want to run something past you because, I've always thought that there's a bit of a pattern that the liberal elite tend to go left-wing, and yet a lot of immigrants actually tend to go right-wing because perhaps they're from families with very traditional value systems. Perhaps it's because social mobility really matters. Perhaps it's because they're not from backgrounds where they are used to having welfare payments, countries like Nigeria, countries like Kenya. Do you think I've got a point there, or is that sort of making a sort of, a fabrication?
Oh, definitely, 100%. I think that I think what you see, Alex, you see lots of progressive liberal activists essentially exploiting ethnic minorities by suggesting that they are implementing or looking to push forward progressive policy proposals because it commands ethnic minority support. But when you actually look deep down within many ethnic minority communities in our country, they're deeply traditional, strong family-oriented, community-spirited values. You talked a great deal about social mobility. There are migrant families up and down this country. They migrated to this great country, largely because of the internationally respected education system. And as you say as well, you talk about the quality of public services. Of course, we should always think about how public services they could be more efficient and responsive. But if you compare it to the kinds of social infrastructures we have in, various parts of Africa and Asia, to be quite honest, they're underdeveloped. So I think what you see actually is when you talk to many ethnic minority people, they have very positive orientations towards British democracy and our public services.
And do you think that the next leader is likely to represent real change and start tackling some of the issues we've been talking about head on, or are you worried it's going to be more of the same? And who would be your pick?
Well, I think that, firstly, Alex, I've heard a great deal about tax cuts. I think a reheated version of Thatcherism is not the order of the day, if I'm being completely honest. There have been numerous surveys which showed that there are many voters now who are very much of the view that there does need to be a certain degree of public spending in order to lift left behind communities. I think in terms of the candidates, I don't really have a particular favourite, but I'd love to see a candidate that talks about the values, the values of strong families. I think stable families, strong communities, talking about the fact that we are greater than just being mere freedom-loving individuals. We have a deeper meaning than that in life. And crucially, I would like them to talk about the bread and butter, to be honest, about how do we have a more robust immigration regime, talking about social integration. You've talked today about the numerous child sexual abuse scandals that we've had in this country. Those are clear cases of law and order breaking down. A politically correct culture and identity politics being prioritised over the protection of the most vulnerable. Those are kind of things I'd like to see in this leadership contest.
Rakib, it's always fantastic having you on the programme. Rakib Ehsan, he's a columnist at The Critic. Let's go back to my studio guest today, political commentator Emma Webb. Emma, I mean, it's interesting listening to Rakib there. It's made me wonder, have we really had a Conservative government for the past decade?
Well, I certainly don't feel that we have. I think there are many, particularly after 2019, who have been disappointed by the government's lack of Conservative vision, lack of Conservative principles and backbone. It seems to be almost freewheeling. Going back to the point that was made about the diversity within the party, there is one thing that I think does distinguish the Conservative Party currently from the Labour Party that I believe is Conservative, and that is the way in which the candidates have been viewed by the left as being almost, diversity candidates. The points that have been made about whether or not a person from a certain ethnic minority group could rise to being the leader of the Conservative Party. Well, actually, that is one thing that I think is Conservative about the current government and about this leadership race, which is that you have all of these candidates from a range of backgrounds, and none of them are diversity candidates as the left would have. They are all there on the basis of merit. They're there because they're good politicians. It's absolutely nothing to do with their race. And when you hear people like Kemi Badenoch or Suella Braverman talking about these issues, Suella Braverman very, very good on the immigration side of things, Kemi Badenoch talking about principles and having a real Conservative vision. There is a meritocratic approach that is based in equality, and I think that is actually what distinguishes the Conservatives from the Tories in the discussion that they're currently having about the race of candidates, because actually on the left side we're seeing a lot of things that would have probably been historically assigned to racists. The way that they are talking about the race of these candidates is something that you don't really see in Conservative circles. And I think actually that emphasis on equality and meritocracy is very Conservative.
Emma, thank you. Well, the UK could record its highest temperature ever next week as forecasters put out an amber heat warning. And as per usual, our unprepared country is wilting at the edges. Gritters are being used to spread sand to stop roads melting. Kids are being sent home from school. Birds are apparently falling out of the sky. For a country that talks about weather so much, we seem to have very little concept of how to deal with it. Heaven knows how the cradle of humanity finds root in the African Rift Valley, while the earliest settlements were in Mesopotamia in the Middle East. How the Romans and Greeks forged great civilizations under the Mediterranean sun is anathema to modern man. But what does this mean for the poor souls of Albion today, toiling in the heatwave? Alice Porter joins us from a building site in Reading. Alice, how are those burly men? Are they sunburnt and fed up or just getting on with the job?
Hi there. Yes, I was at a construction site earlier today. I've now come down to the beautiful river in Reading to see how people are enjoying the sunshine. And I have to say, it is very difficult for people who are trying to go about their day. When I was at the construction site, the men who were there were telling me that actually a lot of the material they're working with is very hard to deal with. The timber, they were saying, was sort of bending. I didn't even know that was possible. So they're saying it's difficult physically to do the job, but also they're sweating so much, and a lot of them are overheating, and it's making it very challenging. So challenging, in fact, that actually MPs this week are looking at legislation to make sure that there is a maximum temperature for people to be working in, and that would be about 30 degrees Celsius or 27 degrees Celsius if you are doing strenuous activities such as construction. So that's something that MPs are looking at because of so many people are impacted by the high temperatures in certain professions, including working in kitchens. I was actually, earlier today, I went to a curry house and I was asking them how they're coping with the temperatures, which in their kitchens they're saying it's getting well above 30 degrees. And in fact, I think they were saying it feels hotter because you've got steam coming up, the steam not able to escape, sort of lots of smells and people in a very confined space. It makes it really difficult to work, and it's also impacting businesses as well. So I was speaking earlier to Mo Fahim. He is the owner of Spice Masters in Tilehurst, and this is what he had to say.
People are turning around and calling up saying, can I cancel the bookings? And then we do ask, like, why are you cancelling a booking? And then there was like, oh, the weather is too hot. With this weather, we don't really like to come out for the curry. So we just like to do like other stuff. So they don't come. They don't want to come.
And what kind of percentage have you noticed in terms of a drop in bookings?
Oh, I can say is about 30%, 35%. You know. So it's just people doesn't want to have any Indian food in this hot weather.
Well, I don't envy him. Alice, I think things are set to get even hotter.
Yes, that's right. It's going to make it even more difficult for people in those professions. I mean, it's great if you're an ice cream seller, and I think you're going to make a ton of cash over the weekend because the temperature is set to rise even further, so much so that the Met Office have put an amber weather warning in place that's actually been extended. It's going to start on Saturday and go all the way till Tuesday, with temperatures peaking at about 36 degrees Celsius on Monday. And actually, well, I looked at what an amber weather warning means. It actually means there's danger to life, which sounds pretty grim. So, you know, great if you're out and about and you're keeping cool, but particularly for people who are vulnerable, people who are elderly, you really need to keep an eye on them in these hot temperatures over the weekend.
Alice Porter, thank you ever so much. Well, here's my tip for the week. Buy a fan and stop moaning. Leave that to me. It's time for my daily news rant. It's the Alex Agenda. From rushing to resuscitate the parliamentary policeman stabbed in a terrorist attack, to allegedly mowing down his neighbour's 1,000 quid cat and callously driving off, has MP Tobias Ellwood gone from hero to zero? Apparently, his £1 million house has been attacked with croquet mallets in a fitting scene of leafy village vengeance. But allegedly, the apologetic statesman unfurled his chequebook and offered to replace the deceased moggy. Perhaps he should be reminded the going price for cruelty to cats is £250,000. Just ask Kurt Zuma. Now we all remember the chaos at school where feral kids unleash hullabaloo until poor Prof almost has a coronary. Spare a thought for Sir Lindsay Hoyle today. The Commons Speaker, with his avuncular Lancastrian drawl, looks like he was about to pop an artery as he reprimanded the screeching baboon-like antics coming from the benches, resorting to demanding the Sergeant-at-Arms remove the offending brutes from the chamber in scenes that wouldn't look out of place in a Shakespearean play.
Shut up a minute! Come. Give me the word in. Order! Order! I say to the honourable gentleman, give me the seat. I will not tolerate such behaviour. If you want to go out now, but if you stand again, I will order you out. Make your mind up. Either shut up and get out. I order. Shut. Shh. Neil Hanvey, I am now naming you and Kenny McCaskill to leave this chamber. Sergeant, deal with them. Deal with them. Deal with them. Just sit down. Out. No. Sergeant at Arms, escort them out.
It's ironic that the perpetrators from Alex Salmond's Alba party were creating a cacophony over Scottish independence. Looks like they got exactly what they wanted, being ejected from Westminster. Well, sorry to tell you this, folks, but COVID is back. While we've all been bemoaning the farce of current politics and trying not to frazzle in the heat, King Tedros of the WHO has been plotting the return of face masks and pandemic tyranny. What is it with the 21st century's self-indulgent addiction to disaster? Can't we just live vicariously through Netflix rather than try to artificially recreate the woes of medieval plays and Cretaceous climate apocalypse? It's all rather tedious. Emma, what do you want to talk about?
Well, I mean, the return of masks is an important subject. I think that I've noticed a lot of people outside, particularly in parks in the warm weather, wearing masks. And I think many people will be very concerned by that. But it's more than that. It goes back to what you were discussing over the weather, that there seems to be this sort of leftover attitude from coronavirus that when it comes to whether people are allowed to go to work when it's hot, that we should be capping. We should be putting a temperature cap so that people can't work over a certain temperature. There's this kind of nannying that seems to have seeped into every aspect of our lives. And yes, I'm worried about the return of all of the COVID tyranny, but I'm also concerned that this is going to seep into all sorts of areas of our lives and that we're going to become basically patients of the state.
I think we already are, Emma. It's seeped already. Emma, thank you ever so much. Reminds me, actually, that Mark Morrison song from the 90s, Return of the Mac. Maybe he could have a comeback too with Return of the Mask. Well, you've been sending in your views throughout the show today. Starmer treats the House of Commons like a courtroom, says Michael. He just attacks the person, not the policies. He is like the bully in the school playground. I would think he'd imagine that was high praise. I think he's a bit wet myself. Peter says, we need a fresh face without the baggage and we need a woman. Kemi Badenoch would be good, but I'd like to see and hear more of her thoughts on TV. Wouldn't we all? But they're just expediting the whole process, aren't they? We barely get to look in the whites of their eyes. Matthew says, I like Penny Mordaunt. For those who don't know her, she's always been a strong orator and strong speaker in the Commons on the Parliament channel. She's the dark horse and a great choice. Mike says, Kemi would, I feel, shake things up in a positive way. She's got to be worth a try. Lots of love for Kemi. Well, that's all I have time for today. Join me again for We Need to Talk About right here on GB News at the same time, 2 o'clock tomorrow. Coming up next, it's The Briefing with Darren McCaffrey. You want to watch that because all the votes are kicking off. People are going to be booted out of the competition. The intrigue is peaking, so don't go anywhere. First, though, it's time for the weather forecast, and I think we all know what it's going to look like. Bye-bye.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Dry for many of us today, although not for everyone. There will be some warm sunshine across much of the country. There'll also be some showers for parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. Low pressure is way to the north of the UK, but it's still close enough to produce a few showers for Scotland and Northern Ireland. For England and Wales, a ridge of high pressure continues to dominate and it's a fine day. But there has been some early cloud for southern parts of England and South Wales, and that's slowly peeling away during the afternoon. Sunnier skies follow, but there'll also be some sunny spells for Scotland and Northern Ireland, albeit with 1 or 2 showers. The most frequent of these will be in the far north, where it will be cool with a keen breeze. I think high teens, low 20s for northern parts of the UK, mid to high 20s further south, and then a warm night to come for many of us, with the cloud disappearing in the south, but with plenty of clear spells for many. There'll be a few more showers coming into northern and western Scotland and parts of Northern Ireland overnight. 12 Celsius in Glasgow and Belfast, 15 for London, so a relatively mild, or in some places warm night to come. And then another fine start to the day tomorrow with plenty of sunshine for England and Wales. I think 1 or 2 showers could just about move into parts of England, especially over the Pennines, and they'll be more widespread for Scotland and Northern Ireland as well. In between, still some sunshine, high teens, I think, widely in the northern half of the UK. Sunshine remains in the south with 25 to 28 Celsius. Into Thursday evening, the showers in the north eventually die away, and then widely clearing skies. And really the trend into the weekend is for high pressure to develop widely across the UK. That will lead to widespread sunshine and dry weather, and it will turn increasingly hot, temperatures approaching the mid-30s later.
On radio, they call it the